Welcome to Agora Nexus with Atabai, where knowledge and awareness converge. Wisdom begins with curiosity. The unexamined life is not worth living.
Okay, so let's get into something that honestly is just fundamentally weird. Unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP. What are we even looking at here? Where might they come from? And how do we make sense of all these persistent and sometimes really bizarre encounter reports? You've pulled together a fascinating set of sources for us today. It's quite a range. You've got these classic alleged encounters, some deep historical dives, and even, the latest governmental buzz around it all. Covers a lot of territory.
It really does. We go from these incredibly personal, sometimes deeply psychological accounts, all the way up to high-level government discussions about potential, well, non-human intelligence, and even some, let's say, very speculative ideas about where these things might actually be based.
Exactly. So yeah, our mission here is to sort of walk through these different angles from the sources, pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising bits, and just try to help you, the listener, get a slightly clearer view of what is, frankly, a pretty complex and baffling subject. Let's get into it.
Right. A good starting point, I think, is one of the cases that often comes up as like foundational for this whole abduction narrative, the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Ah, the Hills. Yeah, 1961. Super famous case. So story goes they're driving home, New Hampshire, sees something weird in the sky. Barney gets out to look closer. Is that right?
That's the account, yeah.
Yeah.
He apparently got really close, maybe 50 feet from this hovering object, described it as pancake-shaped silent windows. And through the windows, he said he saw figures, like a dozen occupants, wearing these dark, almost Nazi-like uniforms, was his description. Freaked him out, understandably.
Yeah, I bet. And then things just got weirder, didn't they? Like the beeping sounds, the car vibrating, and then realizing they got home way, way later than they should have. Something like 7 hours for a 200-mile drive.
Exactly. A huge chunk of missing time. And they couldn't really remember what happened during those hours. Just, fragments, turning onto a dirt road, maybe seeing a roadblock, a glowing orb. But there was physical evidence, too, or apparent evidence.
Look what?
Well, Barney's shoes were stuffed up, his binocular strap was torn. He had this weird compulsion later to examine his groin area. And Betty found this strange pink powder on her dress. Plus, these odd polished spots on the car trunk that seemed to mess with a compass needle.
Okay, so missing time, weird physical traces. This obviously caused them distress, especially Barney. The sources mentioned he developed stress symptoms.
Yeah, physical symptoms like a ring of warts around his groin attributed to the stress. It was a year later, really wanting to know what happened in that gap, that he sought out hypnotic regression therapy.
With Dr. Benjamin Simon. And he hypnotized them separately, right?
Yes, separately. And under hypnosis, a consistent story reportedly started to come out from both of them, being taken onto the craft, separated, undergoing what felt like, well, medical exams, skin scrapings, nail clippings, hair samples taken. Betty described a particularly painful experience with a long needle inserted into her navel.
Oof. And the star map was
Yeah.
probably the most famous detail.
Absolutely. Betty described being shown this map, which she interpreted as showing alien trade routes or something like that. And, the sources point out that this whole account, the structure of it, really became kind of a template. It fits into what some researchers call a two-stage psychological model, explaining abduction stories. It's set a pattern.
Interesting. So it wasn't just a one-off weird story.
Mhm.
It sort of laid the groundwork.
Yeah.
You mentioned this idea of looking back at older stories now, calling them paleo-abductions.
Right. It's not saying aliens were abducting cavemen necessarily, but that researchers are looking at older, unexplained encounters and seeing similar themes.
Older encounters. Like, how old? Give me an example.
Well, the sources bring up one from 1896. A Colonel H.G. Shaw claimed he was harassed, almost grabbed, by these tall, thin humanoid figures covered in fine hair. So this idea of being unwillingly interfered with or taken by strange beings, it might have roots that go back further than the flying saucer era.
Huh. So the pattern might predate the specific alien interpretation. The sources also mention some early whispers, right? Like that 1953 article asking if saucers were kidnapping people.
Yeah, and the disappearance of those guys, Carl Hunrath and Wilbur Wilkinson. Some people at the time openly speculated it was, an alleged abduction by flying saucers. These ideas were kind of floating around.
But then the 80s hit, And it really blew up.
Oh, massively. You had figures like Bud Hopkins, Whitley Strieber with his book Communion, David Jacobs, the Harvard psychiatrist John Mack. They all published these really influential works suggesting alien abduction wasn't just rare anecdotes, but maybe a widespread phenomenon.
And they weren't talking small numbers, were they? Based on studies like Thomas Bullard's analysis of hundreds of cases, Hopkins and Jacobs were suggesting maybe tens of thousands of people, possibly more, just in North America, might have had these experiences.
Which led them to this really big and, let's be honest, pretty controversial idea. The idea that it wasn't random. Hopkins and Jacobs especially pushed this concept of an elaborate process, even a human hybridization program.
Hybridization. Creating what, like human-alien hybrids? Hybrids, I think the sources called them.
That was the term, yeah. Though the why was always murky, what was the purpose, nobody seemed to know. And they linked this to anecdotal reports, some going back decades, of things like phantom pregnancies supposedly connected to UFO encounters.
And John Mack's angle was interesting too, right? He interviewed loads of these people and concluded most weren't like mentally ill. They seemed like ordinary folks describing extraordinary things.
Exactly. He documented this whole detailed subculture that had grown up around it, with different types of aliens, the Greys, reptilians, Nordics, and complex backstories and explanations for why they were supposedly here.
And you can see how that feeds into pop culture, like the X-Files, which the sources mentioned. That show really blended abduction themes with government conspiracy stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes those conspiracy themes touched on other real-world anxieties involving groups like FEMA or militias, according to some interpretations noted in the sources. It became a tangled web.
Okay, so if you look across all these different accounts, do researchers like Bullard see, like, the standard sequence of events? Is there a typical abduction story structure?
Bullard argues there is, yeah, a sort of broad, fairly consistent sequence.
What does that look like, generally?
Well, it usually starts with the capture being taken, then comes the examination. After that, maybe some other procedures, then the return, usually back to where they started or close by, and finally the sort of realization event where it hits them what might have happened.
The examination part sounds pretty consistently terrifying in these reports.
It often is, yeah. Described as invasive, clinical, much like what the Hills reported. Taking samples, prodding, needle insertions, and then those subsequent procedures can get even stranger. Things like testing.
Testing? What's that?
Where the person suddenly finds themselves able to operate some complex alien device, even though they feel confused and disoriented. Or child presentation, which ties back to that hybridization idea being shown hybrid babies or children.
Wow. Okay. Any other less common things reported?
Sometimes, yeah. Between the exam and the return, people might report things like a conference or being given a tour of the craft or even going on a journey. Sometimes even a theophany, an encounter with beings that feel godlike or incredibly powerful.
Man, it sounds unbelievably stressful for anyone who genuinely believes this happened to them. The sources talk about psychological trauma.
They do. People often report significant distress, PTSD-like symptoms. Some use the term post-abduction syndrome, though, it's not an official medical diagnosis. And the sources also bring up research, like that 2003 Harvard study.
What did that find?
Well, it explored the beliefs and experiences, finding links between belief in alien abduction and things like having previous New Age beliefs, a tendency towards vivid fantasy, and experiences like sleep paralysis. The suggestion was that these factors might contribute to creating false memories that feel very real and traumatic, kind of like PTSD.
So you've got this complex picture, reported experiences, historical context, psychological angles, but then more recently, the whole conversation shifts again, right? With the government getting more involved, or at least more publicly involved.
That's a huge shift. The sources really emphasize this. The Pentagon effort, Kirkpatrick's office, AARO, they were tasked with seriously reviewing these claims, including the really explosive ones about secret government programs recovering, maybe even reverse engineering, a non-human craft. And apparently they got unprecedented access.
And didn't this review turn up something that, like, genuinely surprised top intelligence officials?
According to one source, yes. Apparently, the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, was quite stunned by something uncovered in 2023. It raised the question, could this discovery, whatever it was, be the real reason behind the persistent belief in a secret U.S. alien program? It seems investigators are still trying to figure out why certain officials might have misled others about it.
Which ties into that whole Cold War secrecy thing the sources mentioned.
Absolutely. You know, back then, secrecy was everything. Sources suggest the government might have used UFO stories, or at least allowed them to circulate, as cover for their own secret aircraft testing, maybe around places like Area 51, or perhaps to mask vulnerabilities at sensitive sites, like nuclear bases. Stories could just spin out of control, like the one about recovering bits of space metal.
Right, layers upon layers of secrecy and maybe deliberate misdirection. But now the language is changing in official circles too. This term non-human intelligence, NHI.
That's a really key linguistic shift. You see it popping up in proposed legislation, like the UAP Disclosure Act, mentioned in the sources, used it 22 times. And the definition they used was broad. Basically, any intelligent life form that isn't human, regardless of where it comes from.
And David Grush, the whistleblower making waves recently, he specifically prefers NHI, right? Because he doesn't want to assume they're alien in the sense of coming from another planet.
Exactly. He's quoted saying he doesn't want to denote origin, suggesting maybe they aren't extraterrestrial, or at least we don't know that they are. And his claims, while controversial, have gotten support from some pretty serious people.
Like who?
Well, retired Army Colonel Carl Nell, who worked on the UAP task force with Grush, he's gone on record saying he has zero doubt NHI is real and interacting with us, and that there are people, unelected people within the system who know about it.
Zero doubt.
Yeah.
That's strong language from someone like him.
It really is. And you've got others, like retired Admiral Tim Gallaudet, former NOAA head, saying the U.S. is in contact with NHI and should disclose it. He even mentioned these friends who supposedly lived underground, plus political figures like Matt Gaetz talking about seeing UAP formations over military airspace.
Okay, so we've gone from abduction tales to government investigations talking about non-human intelligence. But Grush's point about not assuming origin, where else could they be from, if not space?
Well, this leads us down a really interesting, though definitely more speculative path mentioned in the sources, the ultraterrestrial, or more commonly, the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, CTH.
Cryptoterrestrial, meaning hidden on Earth.
Basically, yeah. The idea is that maybe these NHIs aren't visitors, but residents. Sequestered terrestrial cultures, as one source puts it, existing alongside us in distinct stealth. Hidden somewhere within Earth's environment, deep underground, under the oceans, maybe even on the moon, somehow tied to Earth, or perhaps subtly integrated into human society itself.
Whoa. Okay, that's a completely different framework. And the sources link this to old myths and legends.
They do. The argument is, maybe those old stories aren't just stories. Think about the Nagas in Hindu myths, living in underground cities. Or the Tuatha Dé Danann in Irish folklore, retreating to a hidden otherworld. Could these be like distorted memories of real encounters with non-human intelligences already here? The suggestion is maybe we should treat mythology like a historical record sometimes. Look for patterns.
What kind of actual observable things make people consider this, though? It sounds pretty out there.
The sources point to two main things people cite, empirical mysteries, they call them. First, UAP sightings associated with water. Not just flying over it, but entering or exiting it, sometimes at incredible depths. That Puerto Rican trench incident, an object supposedly coming up from 22,000 feet.
Yeah, 22,000 feet is insanely deep. What's the second mystery?
UAT activity near potential underground access points. Volcanoes are a big one. Popocatépetl in Mexico is frequently cited, with videos showing objects flying near or seemingly into the crater. Some interpret these as suggesting portals or actual bases deep inside the Earth.
So deep water and volcanoes. What other threads get woven into this CTH idea in the sources?
Yeah, quite a few, actually. It touches on how little we've truly explored our own planet, the deep oceans, deep subterranean environments. It plays with the idea of potentially unknown, maybe pre-human civilizations on Earth, connecting to flood myths or debates about underwater structures like Yonaguni off Japan.
And those weird ancient artifacts.
Right, things that look technologically advanced for their time, like those 500,000-year-old interlocking wood pieces found at Colombo Falls, or the super precise stone cuts in Egypt. The sources even note alleged CIA interest in ancient civilizations, maybe looking for hints of lost high tech.
The CIA looking at ancient tech.
Yes.
Okay, this CTH really pulls from everywhere.
It does. For some people, it connects to cryptozoology, too. Bigfoot sightings, sometimes happening alongside UAP activity, legends of giants, even speculation about ancient reptilian races, like those Nagas, having a deep history on Earth. Places known for weirdness, like Mount Shasta, often feature in these theories. And even the moon gets pulled in, with claims NASA might be hiding evidence of NHI presence there.
It's definitely a hidden world kind of theory. Very different from just spaceships.
Speaking of different perspectives, the sources also bring in Jacques Vallée. His take is unique, isn't it?
Vallée's work is crucial, yeah. He's been researching this for decades, connecting UFOs, folklore, paranormal phenomena. He doesn't just focus on the objects. His key insight is noticing how the form of the encounters changes over history, like fairies, then maybe airship pilots, then gray aliens.
Exactly. But while the form changes, Vallée argues the underlying motifs stay strangely consistent.
Motifs.
Encounters with little non-human people being taken against your will, experiencing missing time or time distortions, getting weird, cryptic messages. Vallée's big idea, and it's a challenging one, is that the encounters themselves, the absurdity, the characters, the technology displayed that might be the actual communication. He uses this analogy like a 4D creature trying to talk using 3D words. We just don't have the framework to fully grasp it.
The weirdness is the message. Yeah, that changes how you look at it.
It really does. It pushes back against simply thinking about nuts and bolts craft. Vallée suggests it might be functioning as a kind of control mechanism for our collective consciousness, nudging human society, maybe manipulating us towards some unknown goal. Could be enlightenment, could be conflict, could be something else entirely.
A control system influencing humanity. That's a pretty heavy thought.
It is. And he explores ideas like the phenomenon being more like information, maybe tapping into some kind of shared consciousness or a reality we don't normally access. The interdimensional hypothesis fits here too, parallel universes, different dimensions coexisting, maybe even time travel or something stranger linked to dark matter.
So not necessarily physical travel across space, but maybe something punching through from another reality or dimension.
That's one possibility he considers. And importantly, Vallée also believes the phenomenon might be deliberately deceptive, maybe making us think it's extraterrestrial. He even raises the possibility that human groups on Earth might be aware of this deception and exploiting it for their own ends.
Wow. So potential human manipulation layered on top of this already baffling phenomenon. That really complicates the picture.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity, yeah.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've covered a lot of ground based on these sources you brought. We started with the hills, that classic abduction narrative and its psychological interpretations. We looked at older historical accounts, these potential paleo-abductions. Then the big shift with government interest, the talk of non-human intelligence, the backdrop of secrecy. We explore the really mind-bending cryptoterrestrial idea, NHI, hidden here on Earth. And finally, Vallée's perspective, focusing on patterns, communication through absurdity, and potential manipulation.
Yeah, I think the sources together show that this whole UAP subject is way more complicated and honestly stranger than just saying it's aliens from space. That simple explanation doesn't really fit all the data points presented.
And even the official government reports, while they try to explain things away with, drones or clutter, they still end up with this category of unknown. They admit their stuff they just can't identify.
Exactly. That intelligence community report had its categories, but it still left room for an other bin, things that might need, quote, additional scientific knowledge to even figure out. They couldn't definitively say all the unknowns were foreign tech or U.S. tech. That core mystery remains. Senator Rubio summed it up, didn't he? There's stuff flying in our airspace and we don't know who it is and it's not ours.
Yeah, that quote sticks with you. It leaves us with so much to chew on. The recurring patterns, the secrecy, the possibility of intelligence hidden right here, or Vallée's idea of the phenomenon as a kind of control system or message.
It really forces you to question assumptions. If you take seriously, just for a moment, Vallée's idea that the encounters themselves are the message, or the CTH implication that NHI could be woven into Earth's history and environment, how does that change our view of ourselves, our history, our place in the cosmos, or even just here? It opens up a whole different set of questions, doesn't it?
If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any episode. Your support means the world to us.